Speaker McCarthy kicked off the negotiations with President Biden February 1st. The next time they met was nearly 100 days later. It shows that this White House and Leader Schumer in the Senate are not taking these negotiations seriously. They're not willing to take stock of our spending, which is the first ingredient of any deal to raise the debt ceiling when Republicans control any branch of government. And so they need to come to the table and get serious. We need to get down to policy so we don't get anywhere close to the target date in early June.
Well, it's unbelievable that the White House and the Senate would play around with this incredibly important date. I know that the staffs have been going back and forth talking about ideas, and I wonder if you can give us any assessment or information as far as what common ground there could be. Because we understand that there has been some common ground on clawbacking of the unspent COVID-19 funds, which of course is in your bill that passed the House. Energy permitting reform could be something that both sides agree on, both permitting reform for fossil fuel and green, and perhaps caps on future discretionary spending growth. Does that sound like there could be some common ground on those ideas?
Yes, there is, except this administration's listening to their political advisors. They want to get closer to the date before they agree to anything. And it's really absurd and really dumb, in my opinion, very dangerous for the economy. But the contours of the deal are the same as you outlined and a few other items potentially, but it's not a big deal. And that's frankly what this speaker understands about this administration and Democrats running the Senate. The only thing they do big is spend money. And so we're trying to pare spending as best we can, knowing we only control half of the legislative branch and we're negotiating with the White House. So there's a lot more work that has to be put in, and the White House has to get a lot more serious than they currently are.
What kind of extensions are you looking at? I mean, would you do a compressed calendar and give a short-term extension of the debt ceiling? I know in your bill, Kevin McCarthy has talked to us about, revisiting this in March of 2024. Is that just something to get him to the negotiating table? Because it seems like in no one's interest to start having these discussions again in an election year in less than a year away.
Well, let's see if they get serious on spending caps. Let's see if they get serious on policy. If they get serious on that, then maybe a longer date could be a possibility. But if they don't, then let's do a short date. And we're not talking a short term. You can't do a week raise or a month raise at the debt ceiling. It doesn't work that way. The mechanics of this are far more complicated than a continuing resolution to keep the government open. So let me just disabuse anybody who thinks that that's possible. What we're talking about here is a one-year extension of the debt ceiling in return for spending cuts over time, as well as a number of policy initiatives that I think will stimulate economic growth over the long term. It's a very balanced set of plans that the American people know and need, especially considering the state of the economy, especially considering the state of inflation in America today that this president has lit the fuse on. So let's get, the key piece of the economics here are how the American families live, and that's what we're trying to address in this bill, is trying to make their lives better.
A balanced set of ideas, and yet you've had a handful of people in the House that did not vote for it, right? We spoke with Tim Burchett yesterday about his reluctance. Is there unity in the Senate? What can you tell us about what's going on in the Senate? Because Senator Mike Lee told me a couple of weeks ago that there was absolutely no appetite for doing a clean debt ceiling with no strings attached like the president wants. But you question whether or not you actually see unity in the Senate over there among Republicans.
Well, look, you have enough Republicans have signed on to Mike Lee's letter, and I commend Senator Lee for putting that together and the help of many senators to say we're not just going to have a clean debt ceiling increase. We need to address our fiscal house, our spending in America, and I commend the senators for standing up and doing that. Now, what they said clearly is it's in the Speaker's court to negotiate with President Biden. The only plan that's been passed in Washington to raise the debt ceiling is the one out of a Republican House. So the White House needs to get serious and come to the table with the Speaker of the House and negotiate with us. If Senator Schumer wants to be at the table, well, giddy up, big boy, pass a plan and you can get to the table too.
Yeah, I mean, has the president abandoned this idea that he doesn't want any strings attached? The public understands that this reckless spending of the last couple of years led to 40-year high inflation.
Yes, but I don't think he gets that, and I don't think this administration believes that. I think they're looking at alternative views of economics that have no sound basis in economic policy or economic history. And frankly, we know that it was their spending that lit the fuse, and the American people know that because they're experiencing and suffering the high cost of everything at the grocery store. To everything they're buying is more expensive today than it was pre-COVID in a dramatic way. And so we have to address how the American people are experiencing and suffering under Biden's-led inflation.
You also have several days of bank regulatory hearings. I know Federal Reserve Vice Chairman Michael Barr and the chairman of the FDIC, Martin Gruenberg, will both appear before the House Financial Services Committee today to discuss banking conditions. Barr expected to testify that the banking system is strong and resilient and will comment on the recent bank failures, saying that it reveals risks of concentrated funding sources and poor management. But look, let's face it, you have small business right now under severe pressure. And the regional banks are pretty much predominantly the lenders to 90% of small business. What can you tell us about the small and regional banks out there, and whether or not we're going to see the small business community fall out of bed here because of this tight credit environment?
Well, look, when the inflation started going as a result of federal spending, the Federal Reserve was behind the ball on raising rates, and they said that inflation was transitory. And then the Democrat House and Senate and the White House spent more money, which further inflamed inflation, and the Federal Reserve got further behind. And that is the crux of what's happening to many banks in America, that they misjudge inflation too, just like the Federal Reserve, just like the Biden administration. And as a result, their balance sheet is quite restricted. The result is a credit crunch for small businesses and for those that own real estate, commercial real estate. I'm worried about that in the long term, and the health and the viability of the full range of banks in America is one that we benefit from. We've got over 4,000 banks in America. That helps small business lending, family lending. We want to keep that. This administration has put more regulations on those banks and made it more difficult to be in that business and more expensive. And families are getting less credit as a result.
And do you think that leads to recession later this year?
I think so. Unfortunately, with this credit crunch, I think it is a problem. And it's a real problem for families as well. And they're trying to, pay for more things on credit cards rather than actually, pare down spending.
That's right. Congressman, thanks very much for your leadership on this. We'll be watching these negotiations. We so appreciate your time.
Great to be with you.
Patrick McHenry. We'll be right back.